James Macandrew, the Aberdeenshire boy who became Otago's tribal chieftain. James Macandrew is one of Pioneer Otago's most fascinating characters. He was a controversial figure then and since, but he was also one of the most energetic, optimistic and determined participants in the development of the Otago settlement. He was born in 1819 on Summer Street, in what was then a neighbourhood of tradesmen on the western edge of Aberdeen. And indeed, Macandrew's father Colin was a shoemaker, but some of his brothers were civil servants, and another one was a lawyer down in Edinburgh. Macandrews were actually from Fortrose, however, and James's parents moved back here soon after he was born. Now, at that time, Fortrose was renowned for its manufacture of shoes for the nearby Highland market town of Inverness, and Colin Macandrew followed that trade as well until his untimely death in 1825. He's buried here somewhere in the graveyard attached to the old Fortrose Cathedral. Now, this, of course, left his widow Barbara with 3 young children to care for. Barbara shifted the family to Sunnyside here in Drumoak Parish, just to the west of Aberdeen on the banks of the River Dee. She's recorded in the 1841 Scottish census as a grocer there. James, meanwhile, continued his education, which had been begun at the Fortrose Academy, and continued until he was 13, no doubt financially supported in that by his uncle and grandfather. This would have been his local church. Another important influence in forming that deep Presbyterian faith that would animate Macandrew for the rest of his life. But he left Drumoak as a teenager, getting a job in the office of a paper mill in Aberdeen. Ambitious even then, he didn't stay long in Aberdeen, making the big move to London in 1838, with financial assistance from his uncle John Macandrew, who also gave him some sage advice to be sensible, to avoid all the temptations of the great metropolis, and to work hard. It was advice that young Macandrew would take to heart. London was truly the centre of the world in the late 1830s, the epicentre of a worldwide trade empire on the rise. For an 18-year-old Scotsman aiming to achieve great things, it was definitely the place to be. James began, of course, at the bottom rung, as a clerk in the office of a large paper business. But he was clever, personable, and diligent. He rapidly rose through the ranks. Then, in 1845, just 25 years old, Macandrew went into business on his own account, first as a bookseller's agent, then as an ironware merchant. He also got married to Eliza Reynolds, reportedly honeymooning at Carisbrooke on the Isle of Wight, a name they would later use for their home in Dunedin. The wedding took place at the Scotch Church by London Wall, which was not only James's place of worship, but also the centre of activity for Presbyterian expatriates in London. Now, the church no longer exists, but it stood somewhere here along the line of the old London Wall. And from 1843, it became the focus of free church activity in London, and also a meeting place for supporters of the Otago Free Church Settlement Scheme. Macandrew quickly became involved in New Zealand affairs, agitating on the Otago Association's behalf at the Colonial Office, and eventually deciding to go to Otago himself. But by then, the New Zealand Company had collapsed and was no longer sending new ships to its colonies. Undaunted, Macandrew and his brother-in-law chartered a schooner of their own, the Titan. They filled the Titan with family members, including Macandrew's brother and his wife's extended family, some staff members and a few friends. But they also filled the ship with trade goods that they could sell on arrival, setting themselves up in business and help pay for the journey. In September 1850, they set sail from London for New Zealand. The Titan arrived in Dunedin in January 1851 like a breath of fresh air. The New Zealand Company's failure had cloaked the settlement's future in uncertainty and gloom. James Macandrew's arrival seemed like a vote of confidence from someone who had all the right attributes. He was a Scot, He was a free church enthusiast, and by all impressions, he was a man of means.
Macandrew immediately set himself up as a merchant, competing fiercely with an earlier business run by John Jones. He helped found the Otago Witness and later the Colonist newspapers, and was a relentless booster of Otago's prospects. With his partner and brother-in-law William Reynolds, he also pioneered trade routes to Australia and Britain.
Above all, with his overweening confidence and enthusiasm, he helped revitalise Otago's economy. His coastal steamers boosted trade, and he won contracts to bring new immigrants from Australia and from Britain. Macandrew had a roller coaster political career. He succeeded Captain Cargill as the superintendent of the Otago province in 1860, but then fell spectacularly from grace the following year on the eve of the gold rush. He was arrested as a defaulting debtor when an inquiry into provincial funds exposed his poor personal financial position. But he famously avoided incarceration in the public jail by declaring his own home a debtor's prison.
The respite was only temporary. He served out the rest of his time in confinement in a building attached to the real jail. But despite this scandal, Macandrew never lost the support of many Otago voters. And his efforts to build the fledgling colony were well remembered when he was released from prison.
And thus began his spectacular comeback. The people of Otago knew his talent, and within 5 years, he was back in power and remained superintendent until the abolition of the provincial system in 1876. He was also elected to Parliament, and he remained a political power in the province until the end of his life.
James and Eliza Macandrew had 9 children together. They enjoyed a happy family life at their home Carisbrook in the Glen until James's financial fall.
After that, they would live here at Collinswood in Macandrew Bay. The bay itself, of course, named for James, while the street it sits near, Marion Street, was named for his mother-in-law, Marion Reynolds, who provided the funds for this house. Neither James nor Eliza was to enjoy a long life. Eliza died in 1875 after a long battle with cancer, aged just 48. James was left a solo father with 5 children aged 6 to 16. He nonetheless kept up his public life, becoming the longest-serving parliamentarian by 1881 and the last survivor of the original House of Representatives. He had finally decided to retire from politics when he was badly injured in a carriage accident just here near his home in 1887 and died soon after. With all the things that he had done and been involved with, it comes as some surprise to note that he was just 68. He was, of course, widely mourned because, for all his faults, he had always held Otago's interests close to his heart. Described by noted historian Eric Olson as Otago's tribal chieftain, Macandrew's bust stands here in pride of place outside the museum.